Rebekkah Smith Aldrich is the Executive Director of the Mid-Hudson Library System and the co-founder and board president of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative and principal author of the award-winning Sustainable Library Certification Program and the soon-to-be-released National Climate Action Strategy. For over 25 years, Rebekkah has worked with public libraries across the globe to ensure library services are relevant and responsive so that our communities thrive. Rebekkah is an active member of the American Library Association, most recently chairing the new Council Committee on Sustainability, serving on the board of the Center for the Future of Libraries, and as a founding board member of the Sustainability Roundtable. Rebekkah was recognized as a Library Journal mover and shaker in 2010 and was presented with the New York Library Association's Outstanding Service in Libraries Award in 2018. Aldrich is an adjunct professor at the Palmer School of Library and Information Science at Long Island University, serves as the Library Journal sustainability columnist, and has written and co-edited 3 books for ALA editions, along with authoring the New York State Handbooks for New Directors and Trustees. Rebekkah is a frequent national and international presenter and writer on the topic of leading libraries forward in smart, practical, and effective ways. So welcome, Rebekkah, and thank you so much for joining us today. We do appreciate your time.
Absolutely, Sarah. Thank you for having me, and thanks for the hearty souls that came today to the live session. I'm thrilled to be here because it's nice to talk to folks in California because I don't have to do the hard sell on what's going on with the climate and working with governments that actually understand the threats that we're under. But what I wanted to do for you today at Sarah's request was give kind of an overview of what's going on in the profession on the topic, how we're using some language to help people kind of broaden their thinking about what this means, because it's a super complicated topic. So as you start to kind of unravel what has contributed to climate change and what some of the solutions are going to be to adapt in the face of climate change, you realize it's connected to like everything in the universe. And that can sometimes lead to like almost paralysis of like not quite sure where to start. So what I want to do for you today is both kind of set the stage, give you some language, point out what's going on in the field that you can learn from and accelerate work you may want to do in your own library, as well as give you examples from libraries that are currently in what's called the Sustainable Library Certification Program, which I'll explain as we go along. But as per Sarah's request, I'm not going to be the only person talking here this afternoon. We're also going to leave plenty of time for you to talk, ask questions, share things going on in your library, because in my experience over the past, at this point, 10, 12 years of working on this topic as my kind of hobby in my profession, the biggest and I think most important thing we can do here is be talking to one another and helping each other connect with resources and ways forward. And that's really what the Sustainable Libraries Initiative is all about, which I'll also explain here today. So Sarah, I'm just going to go ahead and get going, and you'll give me the high sign if anything's up or you want to interrupt at any time. But we will take questions at the end here. So just getting started here, I'm sure none of you are unaware of the fact that we've got an increasing amount of really severe weather and issues that are being driven by climate change that are affecting human health, agriculture, the economy, and in particular on the West Coast, you are facing some really dire issues related to flooding, wildfires, more severe weather, just like we are here on the East Coast as well. I'm in New York State. I'm between New York City and Albany, for those of you familiar with the geography. I work with 66 libraries on an everyday basis that are serving the public here, and we're dealing with similar issues: flooding, more severe weather, hotter days, longer stretches of heat. And climate scientists have given us the really cheery message that it's not going to get any better in the next 30 years. Even if we did everything right by climate change and did all the things we were supposed to do to reduce greenhouse gases, we will still see at least 30 more years of increasingly severe weather brought on by climate change. And that's a daunting thing to confront when you've already faced what you've experienced just in the past, say, 2 years. To think of that continuing at the current pace or even getting worse is really, really scary. Just looking at your own backyard, right? In January, you had the Great Flood. When you look at the numbers related to that storm, just that one storm, when the magnitude of that really comes home, I read it was 150 billion gallons of water in 6 hours. That's got to go somewhere, right? And your infrastructure is not built to handle that amount of water. It displaced over 1,200 people. It affected almost 600 homes in San Diego. I mean, this is something that's pretty daunting just in and of itself. But then you look at the projections of what's coming next. And the kind of lowball projections are that storms like this or related to this, they're saying at least once a year for the next 200 years. That's pretty scary to think about. How are we going to manage that? How are we going to keep people safe? How are we going to protect businesses in our communities? And how do we protect the libraries in our communities? How do we protect our assets, both our staff, our facilities, the stuff inside of our facilities? All of this needs to be thought through. And luckily, most libraries have done work like traditional disaster preparedness, but this is on a much larger scale, affecting many more people. And thinking about where libraries fall into the mix moving forward is a super important thing to prioritize thinking about. There's great data across your state about the impacts of climate change. This is the easiest presentation I've ever prepared for in any part of the world I've ever spoken in. But you've got tons of data out there that indicates you're not just facing more severe weather when it comes to flooding, you're also looking at hotter weather that's going to affect public health. You're also looking at coastal flooding, which is another very scary thing when you think about sea level rises over the next 12 to 20 years in your region. So you've got a multi-pronged kind of impacts of the climate hitting San Diego County. And that's something that, again, can feel very overwhelming or can cause people just to react in the moment after one of these events happens, and then kind of it recedes into the background and people stop thinking about it. But we really need a combined focus on these topics, which includes the library community, preparing not only ourselves, but thinking about how we contribute to our community's resilience in the face of what is predicted to be coming here on all of these different fronts that the climate scientists are helping us understand. So when we think about the scale and scope of this and the massive kind of international messaging around sustainability and climate change, and this headline is just like always stuck in my head since I saw it in 2021, every single major medical journal in 2021 published an editorial calling out the medical community because every single child alive today will be negatively impacted by climate change. And it just, again, brings home the scale and scope of what we are confronting here as really humanity on the planet Earth. It's just huge. It's just massive. And so in 2022, working with the American Library Association, the membership kind of bubbled up and said, we've got to start doing better work on this front, bringing people together, educating folks about not only what's coming, but what we can do as institutions, as members of our own community. So declaring this, honestly, one of the grandest challenges of our generation is not, I think, hyperbole. I know we're very, very focused right now on defending the right to read and advocating for more money for our institutions, but this slow-moving disaster has picked up the pace. And so continuing to ignore it or not address it or not really owning our role in it is super irresponsible. So again, using the American Library Association and this project that I've been working on for about 10 years, the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, we're trying to accelerate understanding, adoption of new actions, and learning from each other of what's working and what's not. So today I'm here to help you kind of connect with that information and see how you can learn more and accelerate the work that you know you need to do in your institution on behalf of those you serve. So at ALA, they actually adopted sustainability as a core value of our profession in 2019. And this term, sustainability, it was very important that we actually define it, because we all use the word sustainability in a multitude of ways. We might be talking about funding, we might be talking about capacity of staff, of the institution itself. But we were really looking at it through the lens of climate change and recognizing the urgency behind the need for action when it comes to climate change. And this is a phrase, climate change, climate action, that in some parts of our country are actually political triggers that can be negative for libraries. So using the phrase sustainability and adopting what we use as the triple bottom line definition of sustainability has now been adopted by the American Library Association. And in my many years of talking about about going green at your library, nothing has helped to expand people's understanding of sustainability as well as this triple bottom line definition of sustainability, because it's not just about going green. We have to face the realities of systemic racism in our country and the marginalization of low-income communities, as well as communities of color, and recognize the fact that climate change is impacting many of those marginalized and under-resourced communities far worse than well-resourced communities in our overall larger neighborhoods. So recognizing there's an impact here, not just on the planet, but the people, as well as facing the economic realities of our libraries. I would imagine that if we were at a bar today talking to each other, most of us would say, I don't have enough money to do what needs to get done at my library. I've got needs in my community that I can't necessarily meet with the budget I've been given. So we have to find balance amongst these three things, is definitely respecting the planet at a much higher degree, but helping the people that we serve be more prepared and recognizing the impacts of our choices on people both locally and globally when we're trying to do good work in this area, at the same time balancing the realities of our budgets and making good decisions, but of course with a realistic eye towards the capacity and the resources that we have as institutions. So the idea here is balance amongst these three kind of areas of the Venn diagram. Sometimes this is called the three-legged stool, because if one of the legs of the stool is not addressed or is unevenly thought about, the stool will tip over. And if I could pan my camera, I would show you one of our board members made me a stool. They like painted it with this logo on it and everything, which is one of my favorite possessions. But we think this has really been a game changer to help people understand the holistic nature of the work that needs to go in to climate action in libraries, because it's not just about recycling paper or getting solar panels on the roof. It's also about how we treat people and how we balance our budgets to make better decisions in the future. So when we think about all the amazing work you are doing in libraries throughout San Diego County, I guarantee you there are amazing people right here on this call this afternoon that are doing good work in all three of those categories and nailing that whole idea of balance and having perfect programs that represent this. But a lot of our trouble is that we're doing these things in isolation. We're not talking to each other. We're all just doing our best thinking and carrying out our best ideas in our own libraries. We need to get organized and all start pulling in the same direction, recognizing where our efforts will have the most impact. And this, of course, extrapolates up to the community level, not just the library profession, but really thinking about the need to partner with others to have the needed impact in our communities based on what is predicted. So this whole idea of collective impact, that no one agency can do the work that's necessary in the face of climate change by themselves. So finding others is exactly what you're doing through this consortia and this event that Sarah has pulled together for you, to recognize that if we work together, we are stronger. And yes, I am the executive director of a library consortia, but it's because I see it on an everyday basis. When we work together, we can go further. When we work together, we can learn faster. And that's what's behind the Sustainable Libraries Initiative and the work you're doing here in San Diego. So given the scope of what's going on, I really love this phrase from Project Drawdown. And if you're not familiar with Project Drawdown, definitely check it out. It's a group of actually climate scientists who got together and figured out what would be the smartest solutions to throw time and energy at to mitigate climate change. But this mantra of every job is a climate job is really important, that we all understand that we have a sphere of influence and the choices we make on an everyday basis can be better for the future if we use the triple bottom line kind of mindset or lens throughout which we're making better decisions for the planet, for people, and our budgets. So owning that, no matter what your role is at the library, is what we're asking, is that we all kind of write that into our job descriptions, that when we start making decisions, whatever your job is at the library, you consider the environmental impact, what it means to people who might be in the supply chain or production line for a product that you're buying, or what it's going to look like when you throw that thing out that you just purchased, or what it looks like to run buildings that are actually healthy for people, right? We all have a sphere of influence. And so this is part of the ask through this work, is that you consider now that you have a climate job. Yes, I know we just added something to a very long list of duties that you have, but I'm not asking you to do extra. I'm asking you to think about what you already do, perhaps in a different way. So this idea of climate action is another massive term that we throw around a lot, but none of us really have a common definition. So at the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, this is the definition that we use to help people wrap their minds around the components of climate action, because again, it's a complex issue. And so using the terminology is great, but are we actually talking about the same thing is a whole nother ball of wax. So we use this three-component formula to add up to what is climate action actually. It's related to three things here. Very traditional climate change mitigation, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions so that climate change doesn't get worse. It's already pretty bad, right? And we'd like to see it maybe level off, if not turn around and go in the other direction, which, believe it or not, we've actually been doing a better job at over the past 10 years than you might think. We are starting to see trend lines come down because of massive investments in renewable energy, electric vehicles, industries being held accountable for their greenhouse gas emissions, right? Large scale policy attention on these topics is making a difference, but probably not fast enough. So making sure we all own our responsibility to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is kind of the prerequisite for climate action. Now, unfortunately, we have to simultaneously adapt in the face of what's already happening. So we have to think through what's coming. How will that change the resilience of my building, the resilience of my staff, the resilience of infrastructure that it takes to drive to work and manage stormwater, and making sure that people are prepared for what is happening here? That's the second component of climate action. And then the third component, which I actually think is probably the most important thing we focus on at libraries, is actually making sure that people have respect, empathy, and understanding for one another, so they will come together and solve the problems of the day. All right, the problems you're facing in San Diego from climate change are different than what I'm facing here in upstate New York. But the key ingredient to facing the realities of the future is having neighbors and communities that will work together and overcome differences and really respect the fact that we are different and we have different experiences in our life, and our basic everyday life is different, which means that there's no one size fits all solution to some of these issues when it comes to mitigation and adaptation. So climate justice is something that is sometimes a triggering phrase, but I think in California, you're going to go way further with that idea than in most places in the US. But this really breaking it down to a non-political conversation about, can we just respect one another enough to come together and address these major issues that are facing all of us, and doing that in a way that respects the differences in our community. So what I've done here for you today is try to take these very large topics that are entwined in economics and social justice and equity, diversity, and inclusion, and all these very complicated topics, and boil it down to, what does this actually look like in libraries? What can we actually do from where we sit as library folks? No matter what our job is in the library, we can be influential on all three of those categories. And I hope right now you're thinking to yourself, ooh, we already do a lot of stuff in all three of those categories. Or I didn't realize I was doing things that's, tied to climate adaptation. That's really one of the first steps, is to inventory what you're already doing, to kind of empower yourself to understand you're already doing good work in this area, but we have to go further, faster, with more intentionality. So we're going to unpack each of those three ideas: climate change mitigation, adaptation, and climate justice. Mitigation will be very, very familiar to you. You'll be like, yep, I get this one. I understand it. I've seen it a million times, right? We're talking about transitioning to renewable energy, reducing the carbon footprint, particularly of facilities and transportation. Those are two main focus areas that we know we can impact, particularly in public libraries, but academic libraries, even though you don't perhaps control your building, you also make choices every day about materials that you buy, the electronic footprint of databases and where your server farms are, and where that computing power is coming from. There's choices all along that we make that impact these things. Hendrick Hudson in Westchester County, New York, was the very first library certified under our Sustainable Library Certification Program. They are very, very close to a net zero building. They have solar, they have a battery storage system, and they've taken a very important step, which is to actually educate their community about the choices that they're making. You're seeing a flat panel monitor that actually lives in the children's area of the library to explain the choices the library has made and why folks might want to think about choosing things differently when they're at home. Your very own San Diego County Public Library is doing great work. They're the first public library in California to be part of the certification program. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with what they're doing. And I'm imagining Sarah's trying to highlight their story as well as her own through this program. But what you're seeing is at the administrative level, and thanks to also the government influence in that particular municipality, no new buildings are being built without them being zero net energy facilities. You're seeing the transition of their fleet to electric vehicles. You're seeing electric charging vehicle infrastructure at every single branch. And wouldn't that be fantastic that everyone knows you get your car charged at the library? You can count on the library to have that charging infrastructure. So positioning libraries as a go-to spot for some of the work that needs to happen in our communities is another big, I think, part of what we're doing, is to make sure people see how not only smart we are, but that we're investing good resources into helping the entire community deal with this very large issue. The Concord Free Library has a resource I think a lot of you will find very interesting. This is available right on their website. This is a library in Massachusetts that's created really the first sustainability plan that we've seen in a library here in the United States. It's a great example of different activities that a library could be prioritizing to think through the energy they're using to run their building, how they manage materials and dispose of materials, how they think about transportation. So it's all designed towards lessening your carbon footprint through many of the choices that you make. Now, this may not be a one-size-fits-all solution, but I think it can spark a lot of good thinking for how you might adopt your own sustainability plan if you don't already have one. This is one of my favorite stories from the Lindenhurst Memorial Library on Long Island. Long Island libraries, particularly in Suffolk County here in New York, have really gone hard at this whole idea of climate action because they were really impacted by Superstorm Sandy, which was almost a decade ago now. It's hard to kind of comprehend the timeline. But the libraries in Suffolk County really saw the impact of Superstorm Sandy, which was a massive hurricane that hit the East Coast, on their community. The flooding, the loss of homes, people being displaced, businesses losing business or going out of business. So those libraries have run at climate action very hard in this community. And this is a picture of Earth Day 2 years ago, where the county executive held a press conference in the library parking lot to announce a multi-million-dollar investment in electric vehicle charging infrastructure throughout the county. They're co-locating charging infrastructure in the public library. So it's available to the public during the day, and then county fleet vehicles are charged in the library parking lots overnight. And the county executive, unprompted, said they were doing the press conference there because libraries are leaders on this topic. And that's the kind of language that can help attract new resources to libraries. It can raise the profile of our libraries. It can attract funding to our libraries, and certainly goodwill across both the public and elected officials, which you can trade in at other points in your advocacy work with those decision makers for very good results, we found. Now, looking at climate change adaptation, this is an area that I think is growing in terms of our responsibility, because it's not just about how we protect our libraries' assets and collections. But the first thing you have to do, which is unfortunately very easy in San Diego, is to identify your county's vulnerabilities, right? You know you're going to be impacted by flooding, by severe weather, and by extended heat waves. Those are the top 3 things you're going to face in San Diego. And I'm sure you've got some complicating issues that would say you might check off a few other things on this list, unfortunately. But once you know what the most likely vulnerabilities are, you can do scenario planning to understand how those events could negatively impact your ability to provide services to your constituents. And then think through, okay, what are we going to do to head that off, to prepare for that, or so we know what to do when that does happen at our institution. So understanding that it's not everything under the sun that might happen to you. There are things that are more likely to happen than others, and planning towards those top 2 or 3 things is a much better use of your time than thinking through the very rare things that might happen, but that you might be very nervous about. I'm sure those things could still happen, but they're much less likely. So focusing in on those vulnerabilities and using the excellent data sources that are out there. I just did a screen capture here of the FEMA National Risk Index, and boy, is that a lot of red, both in your county and around your county, but obviously very high risk index when it comes to the impacts of climate change. This is a super great data set. You can see the link down there at the bottom to hazards.fema.gov. The National Risk Index cross-references 14 data sources to indicate the vulnerability of your community communities in the face of the predicted changes related to the climate change. So you're looking at the cross-referencing of expected annual loss, social vulnerability. So I think you get the drift of what's going on here, but you can play with this data. You can see areas of the county that are going to be more impacted than others. You can see where the pockets of social vulnerability are to know if your library is co-located in an area that's at particular risk for certain aspects of climate change. It's really, really helpful. And it's a great starting spot when you're making the case to administration or a funder or your local government about why you may want to try something different at your library. So this is a slide I really just threw together last night because I'm thinking very big about this topic right now. And behind me is a poster, that green, ugly poster behind me is a book I wrote for ALA called Resilience, which is part of the ALA Library Future series, really thinking about the difference of resilience work for libraries and what it means to both focus on that internally, which is very traditional work we do in terms of disaster preparedness plans, which I hope all of your libraries have. Some new thinking around continuity of operations plans. So not just protecting the collections and technology and footprint of your library, but also thinking about how you keep services going that are critical to your constituency and really thinking that through from a risk manager perspective. There's more and more examples of libraries adopting that type of thinking, as well as adopting incident action plans, which is a tool from the emergency management community to help you manage incidents in real time, which is a lot of times when our whole disaster plan goes out the window, right? We thought one thing was going to happen, but the very nature of disasters means it totally went sideways, right? And you're not quite prepared for what actually happened. So incident action planning is a technique to get used to so that you're more iterative and flexible in the face of an ongoing disaster to figure out how to both protect your organization's assets and deliver services so they're as minimally interrupted as possible. Thinking through facility redundancies for power to keep the power on. Water supply can be interrupted. You can't really run a library without power and water. Where's that going to come from if your traditional supply chains are interrupted? Really important things to build into facility thinking, particularly if you have control over your building or if you're trying to make the case to those who do control your building, things they need to think about because library services are essential. And those being interrupted, it disconnects folks in the community from really important services they're going to need in the aftermath of those disasters, whether it's charging up their car or their phone or accessing FEMA help or getting online again when their home connections are interrupted or community infrastructure is compromised. So maybe I should add internet connectivity to that list as well. And staff preparedness. It always makes me cringe a little bit when I read about all these great plans we have for how to keep library services going, but we haven't paid enough attention to library workers and what they're going to be facing at home in their personal lives. And so helping library workers have communication plans with family members, how they're going to reconnect with families, how to make sure they are properly insured at home, because once their homes are compromised in a disaster, there's really little chance they're going to be caring too much about showing up for work at that point. That's going to be a tough one. And then there's the kind of, I don't want to say flip side, but the additional considerations of how we contribute to community resilience in the face of what is predicted. And you can break that into two categories. The very kind of acute thinking of like, this is happening in my face right now. What do I need? Right? You need folks that are prepared before it happens. You need them to be thinking about food security, perhaps helping people connect to the different agencies and food pantries that are going to be there to help people in those moments. But understanding that these very basic human needs need to be met in those moments. And we have to think about that all the time, not just in the reactive moment post-disaster. There are things we can all be doing. And I encourage those of you in academic libraries to check out the Valencia College in Florida. They're one of our first academic libraries to be certified in the Sustainable Library Certification Program. What a great job they've done on the acute planning area of how on their campus they know they have very vulnerable students and how they are helping to build up the safety net underneath those students, regardless of what disruption hits Florida in their campus area. But then long term, just everyday resilience. needs to be focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. That idea of let's up the ante when it comes to respect, understanding, and compassion that we have for one another in our communities. That is everyday work we can do all the time that ultimately will strengthen all of the other things on this slide. So maybe your continuity of operations plan isn't perfect, but gosh darn it, you've got spontaneous volunteers who show up and help you figure things out because they understand how important the library is to folks, particularly those in your community who are under-resourced. So again, I know it sounds simplistic, but sometimes the last thing on that slide might be the most important thing for us to focus on. So looking at the next slide here, disaster preparedness, it can take all different forms. Of course, you've got your documentation for planning, but there's also things to think about in terms of how you're connecting the folks that you serve with disaster planning resources, with respect for first responders, with helping to lessen the fear factor for children around this topic. That's something close to my heart. I have a story from the New Jersey State Library Conference I was at last year. I keynoted their conference, and one of the women who spoke during the Q&A period told this little story about how her grandson, she took him to a movie theater, and when the lights dimmed for the movie to come on, he screamed out, "Oh no, it's Hurricane Sandy all over again." He didn't understand that the lights would dim for the movie to come on, not just when the power goes out during a massive storm. But what it revealed was the anxiety he was feeling around severe weather in their region. And so helping kids cope with the realities of climate change and feel confident that the adults around them are planning and are going to do their best to keep them safe and they know what to do when things happen could be a great program, particularly on public libraries and school libraries. The other picture here from South Huntington is the first act of their new director, which was to get a whole building generator because she was the assistant director during Hurricane Sandy and learned very quickly the library can't help people if there's no power. This is a really simple, easy program if you're looking for kind of a way to dip your toe into this whole area, which is being a climate resilience hub. This is a program out of Massachusetts that any library in the country can be a part of. You can get a great little climate hub sticker for your library by doing like 2-3 really simple actions, many of which you may already be doing, but it kind of literally puts you on the map as a location that's thinking about climate resilience and demonstrating how libraries contribute to that in the wider community. So it's a good way just to kind of start thinking about it and what it looks like and branding your library along these lines. So climatecrew.org/resilience_hubs, great place to start if you're looking to do a quick win on this topic. All right, let's see where we are. Being a cooling center, particularly in warmer climates like your own, is so critical. As you saw in the data about San Diego, you're going to see a 7-fold increase in the number of very high heat index days, which is going to compromise people's health. It's going to cause breathing problems. It's going to hurt people that are already compromised with health issues. You're going to have bad air quality days, and libraries are going to be safe havens for folks that are dealing with that. Folks who can't afford to leave the air conditioning on all day are looking for opportunities of where to go. And that's a simple thing for us to be able to do and be listed on public health lists as a place people can go to cool down. Just a basic human need that we can probably help meet very, very easily. Here in the Northeast, we're also warming centers for wintertime, which has become increasingly important as folks have been unable to pay their heating bills and keep their homes heated, as well as a growing unhoused population across the country of folks that are very vulnerable during the day in both types of weather. Food security, huge issue, which we all learned the hard way during the pandemic. Understanding that people are very close to the bone when it comes to food security. This looks different in different communities, but I just wanted to show you this, I find, very inspirational little story. This is the library farm up in northern Onondaga in the Syracuse area of New York, if you're familiar with New York. But they have a beautiful backyard, and they turned part of it into a community garden. So half of the plots you see can be borrowed with your library card, and you can grow your own crops on the library property. And the other half is devoted to programming at the library where folks learn how to grow food and preserve food, but all of the crops are then donated to local food pantries and shelters. So they did a little fundraiser with hot sauce. They grew peppers in the garden. They built their own little hot sauce manufacturing assembly lawn at the library, which they've been earning money to run the library farm. It's just super well thought out and a great example of perhaps a different way to think about our collections in libraries, right? We've expanded to think about the library of things. What about harnessing the property we may be sitting on to do some gardening and growing of food? It's a great way to help connect people with where food comes from and how to get fresh fruits and vegetables affordably into the hands of folks in food deserts. This is the Curtis Library in Maine, one of our first libraries in Maine to be certified. They have all edible landscaping, which I thought was a great teachable moment for people, but a lot of programming around food security, where food comes from. Shocking number of kids don't understand where food comes from. So upping the eco-literacy of the young people in our communities is a very good thing because it means as they grow up, they will fight harder to protect the natural world because they understand where things come from and how things work. This is perhaps, and I bet some of you are doing programs like this, repair cafes or fix-it clinics. This is a good example of bringing people together to help one another. So I think of it as the perfect example of a triple bottom line program because you're bringing people together. It's increasing respect people have for each other. Volunteers who know how to fix things teach other people how to fix things, and they keep things out of the waste stream, and they're doing it all at the library. It's a perfect magical program that builds community as well as teaching the importance of reuse and keeping things out of the waste stream. It's just been a beautiful program for the libraries in our system that do it. This is a program in my community. This is my system, the Mid-Hudson Library System. We have 14 of our 66 libraries have specialized collections that are designed around community resilience topics like food security and climate solutions. They also have seed libraries, garden tool lending, and special collections and programs on those topics. And we overlaid them with our state program called Climate Smart Communities, where municipalities have prioritized climate action. And it's resulted in new partnerships and the acceleration of work in this area for those communities. So I'm watching the clock. I'm going to go a little quicker here through the last few slides, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. But climate justice is probably the thorniest topic that we have to deal with here. And we think about social, economic, and environmental justice. They're very complicated topics with a lot of emotion entangled in them and a lot of history to overcome. And so as we think about, I just want to recommend this book, Heat Wave by Eric Kleinenberg. You might recognize that author because he wrote Palaces for the People, which is almost like an ode to libraries and how important they are when it comes to social connections and social capital. But understanding that every single time we have a natural disaster, it's not the great equalizer, as a lot of headlines claim. It does not bring everyone to their knees in the same way. It's definitely impacting people that are under-resourced, people that have been marginalized in our communities, that are lower income, lower education. They are having a much worse time in the face of what's going on than people who are financially secure and have the resources to lift themselves out of the aftermath of these disasters. So the very systemic nature of that means we're not going to take a deep dive in this today, but please know that the work you're doing in equity, diversity, inclusion, justice, and access all ties into climate action. It's part of the same story we're trying to change here in America. So real quick, though, the concepts of social cohesion and civic participation are key to sustainable libraries moving forward. And just to break this down very simply, it's basically getting people out of their houses, getting them to be active and working on little projects across your community to get those wins and see what they can accomplish together. So hopefully they'll work together better on the bigger topics of the day facing our communities. This can look many different ways. I bet you're all thinking to yourself, we do stuff that relates to that, which is exactly why we want to build on that and double down on work to be that social connector and social catalyst for people coming together and doing good work together through libraries, if possible. So the whole thing we're talking about here, I could go on and on with like literally hundreds of other examples, but I can tell people are getting tired already of hearing me. So the bottom line here is that it's not as much about the stuff we're doing, it's more about how we're thinking about the stuff that we're doing. But changing how an entire institution's culture thinks overnight is obviously not the way it's going to work, right? It's going to take each of us practicing a different mindset moving forward to achieve the change that we're looking for. And this quote you've probably seen attributed to many different people, most recently Arthur Ashe, but this idea that we are all in different spots and we have to just confront the reality of where we are, the context we work in, the resources and capacity that we personally have to do work in this area, and just start from where you are. Find like-minded people and move forward as best you can. You're going to see a ton of examples available on the Sustainable Libraries Initiative website that can hopefully inspire you depending on what your situation is. But the idea is to find like-minded people. And that's why Sarah convened us here today, because you are like-minded people who are thinking about the role libraries play in the future and what will it look like. And so finding other people, understanding the urgency behind what's coming and the need to act quicker, and then finding those small wins in your organization to build confidence and empower your organization to go further, faster, and prioritizing the right things moving forward is the goal here. And this is the whole model, the whole planning model behind the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. This is an initiative that was formed by people just like you and me. I'm a volunteer for the program, and about 25 of us here in New York got together and said, we've got to do something different when it comes to what libraries do when it comes to climate change. And that's when we created the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. So it's a volunteer-created, volunteer-led organization that is now national. We have 7,000 members and about 100 libraries now participating in the Sustainable Library Certification Program. And all the work they do builds these 4 characteristics. We're always designing to making sure our libraries are authentic and living their values out loud, that they're contributing to social cohesion and civic participation, and they're addressing the 2 very classic attributes of climate action, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and building community resilience. So these are the 4 things we work on through this project. And living your values out loud, again, may be something you're already doing really well. But we want as libraries to be authentic in this work, not just telling people what to do, but walking the walk themselves, meaning our policies reflect our values, how we treat library workers reflect our values. We have this lovely list of core values from ALA, but are they actually lived out loud in our organizations is a big question for some of us. So that's a big part of where we want people to start thinking on this work so we can be trusted partners out in our communities, on our campuses, and our schools to do good work on behalf of our communities. And if you're looking for a place to get started and kind of gather your thoughts around this topic, the Roadmap to Sustainability, you can download it as a PDF. It's free. It's a free resource. Download it as a PDF, or it's a mobile app you can download from our website, just to kind of get all these definitions of things we're talking about in one place, gather your thoughts about what you're already doing, what some low-hanging fruit might be that you could do moving forward, and a spot to kind of jot down your notes when you go to these professional development opportunities and conferences and chat with colleagues and capture all your thinking into this little notebook. It's very handy. The Sustainable Library Certification Program, which Sarah's library and the San Diego County Public Library are members of, I just saw that the San Diego County Public Library just finished the certification program. Our evaluators are looking at their answers to the program right now. But this is a program that helps you practice this idea of sustainable thinking, using that triple bottom line mindset in 140 different actions across many different categories to think through how to make better decisions at our libraries. So the program itself, it's online. It's a step-by-step format. There's resources to help you do different things. You have a mentor. There's a nice community of practice where you get answers to your questions and bounce ideas off of people. So as I said, there's 140 actions. If you wanted to learn more about it, you can sign up for an orientation session through the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, or Sarah can also answer questions because she's in the program. But it's an interesting place to start if you're not sure what to do. If you're feeling overwhelmed, you're looking for a path forward, this is a path forward. Sometimes you have a path forward thanks to your municipality or your campus's Office of Sustainability, but most libraries across the country don't. So that's why we created this program, is to kind of help lead libraries forward through these different categories and thinking through all the choices we make related to all of these things and how we might do things differently in the future in the face of the reality that we're confronted with. So all of that's designed around the triple bottom line. It's just practicing making decisions through this lens over and over and over again until it sinks in and hopefully changes your organizational culture, which is what we are finding of the libraries that have been certified. 100% of them have said this has changed the way we think as an organization, not just individuals. And that's the key. That's what we're going for. So if you want more information, you can check out the website. There's tons of free resources on the website. And if one of you is involved with the California Library Association, if you want to let them know, they could have a memo of understanding with the SLI and get free membership for all of the CLA members. We're up for that conversation. No money changes hands. It's just a way to get more people in front of the resources and the work that you see itemized here. So Sarah did mention we're working on a national climate action strategy. We hope for that to be out at the annual ALA conference being held right there in San Diego this year. How perfect is that? I think things are all coming together. It's meant to be. But the idea there is to help organize our libraries' thinking across the country and help them prioritize and strategically address the areas that would have the most impact when it comes to climate action. And you just got a crash course in that here this afternoon. So my last little story I want to tell you before we go to questions. This is one of my little rural libraries in Dutchess County, New York, the Pauling Free Library. This is a group of teenagers, which sometimes in a public library, it's hard to get teenagers to show up to programs. But to the two young women in the center of this picture, Maddie and Samantha, they walked into the library one day and asked the children's librarian if teenagers were allowed to book the meeting room at the library. And the teen librarian was smart enough to not say, just say no, which is what the policy told her to say, but she asked why. She said, why would you want to borrow the meeting room? And they said, because we want to make the world suck less. And she said, cool, that's what we do here at the library. Let me look into this. And she went and talked to the library director. And so we've got these two young women. They would like to make the world suck less. He said, cool, that's what we do here at the library. She's like, well, they want to use the room, the meeting room. And he's like, well, what do they want to do? She's like, they want to make the world suck less. He's like, all right, well, that's what we do here. So let's figure this out. So they turned over the teen programming budget line to these two young women. They brought their friends over from the high school, and the group grew and grew and grew every week because they picked community service projects to make their community a better place locally. It was as simple as that. So for all of the different ideas we threw at you today, I think that's what I want to leave you with. We're just trying to make the world suck a little less here. And maybe that's just coming together and figuring out, like these young people did, that sometimes it's just about creating a superhero kit for kids in a domestic violence shelter, or creating a digital ad to help a pet get adopted out of the animal shelter. It's little steps that we take every single day that can make the world a better place. So Sarah, I'm happy to take any questions that have come in, or if you want to open the floor to people. As you can tell, I totally live and breathe this stuff. I love talking about it. I love hearing from folks about what you're working on, what you're thinking about, and your questions always help shape the thinking that we do with the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. So Sarah, thanks again for having me. And I'll stop talking now.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. I think that I know every time I listen to you, I learn a little bit more too, and I just love all the stories. I think that's inspiring. And my message from this is that we don't have to be perfect in this work, but we just have to take a step forward all the time and not be scared to do it too. So thank you so much. Anybody have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I also wanted to say thank you for a lot of information in a space I know very little about. So that was, and so thank you also to end on that Arthur Ashe quote that, one step at a time, do what you can, make the world suck a little bit less.
That's right. I think Sarah made a great point. We're not looking for perfection here. You're not being judged. We're just trying to, do a little better. Let's do a little better here. Because I think if we could all do a little better, everything would go much smoother for us all. Sarah, I see a question came here.
Yes. So Jeffrey's from the UC San Diego Library. Thank you for an inspiring presentation. What specific sustainable practices have been the most effective in libraries so far?
That's a good question, Jeffrey. I don't know if I have statistical information about which have been the most effective. I think it depends on the goals of the organization. So one of my libraries just finished the certification, and their goal was to reduce the carbon footprint of the building. So they really focused on getting an energy audit and finding ways to make the building envelope tighter and to switch over to renewable energy. And then that led to some good conversations with their municipal government that resulted in extra funding for them to do that work, and actually created the first pollinator pathway in Columbia County because of the leadership the library demonstrated. But I'll tell you, I just, from the stories I hear from across the libraries in the program, sometimes it's like something as simple as educating library staff about recycling. I saw it in my own organization where we weren't recycling properly. Our carding company basically was throwing most of our recycling into the garbage because we didn't understand what was recyclable. And it was really discouraging when we heard that. But we did a little bit of staff education. We had a little Earth Day event where we taught people what goes where. Is it garbage, recycling, or compost? And we did a waste audit. I know that sounds so gross because it is, but it taught us so much about what we were doing wrong. It taught us about crap we were throwing out that we shouldn't have bought in the first place, stuff that should have been recycled that we weren't recycling properly, and the fact that we had a lot of food waste that we should be composting. And that activity, the waste audit and the game we played to teach people how to do better, resulted in way more staff being engaged with making better decisions. And so that actually, for my organization and many others, was the most impactful for staff buy-in, to see more staff taking ownership over where things get disposed of, what they're buying to begin with, and seeking out vendors that are more in alignment with our core values. So I know that was kind of, that answer was like all over the place, but it kind of depends on what your goal is. And something I'll share with you, and I'll send this to Sarah to send out to all of you. I'll give you the slides so you have those, but I'll also send you a link to where you can check out the certification presentations of all the libraries who have finished it, because it's like a gold mine of ideas of what libraries have done, what worked, where they got the most press, all that good stuff. So that's a great place to figure out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, that is a really useful resource. I often have gone in there to see what people are doing. And I will also just really highlight that really to get buy-in from our library is the small things. It's literally things like recycling. We do a little bread tag recycling program in our library, and it's the tiniest thing, and it has made people think it's just one little step. And so I'm getting them thinking about that. So then we're thinking about other things and I can introduce it. So I really think it's hilarious because everyone comes and goes, I've collected like 5 bread tags. And I'm like, yay. But they're thinking about all of those other things now too. So it was just a tiny thing that got us started to really think about bigger picture and introduce those bigger things.
It's so interesting you say that, Sarah, because yesterday I was at a program for my libraries, and the libraries were saying the way they engaged with the community that was most effective was something called the Trex Challenge, TREX. Those of you that are familiar with like building your own deck, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But they have a program to collect plastic in your community. And if you collect 1,000 pounds of plastic, this particular type of plastic, they give you a free bench made out of recycled plastic. And this has been the biggest catalyst in many of my library's communities for getting the community engaged with the topic. So they started small, but then one of my library directors in a small rural library was telling me her office is filled floor to ceiling with these like plastic wrappers from the ag waste store and the post office, because everyone in the community is pulling together to try to get this bench for the library. But it's really teaching people about recycling and the fact that this 1,000 pounds would have gone into the landfill had we not organized this recycling challenge.
We do have a question in the Q&A. It is, how do we do climate change measures while not affecting services, for example, lights or energy?
Hmm. There's so much good work out there right now on those particular topics. So, when we think about reducing our carbon footprint, there's a lot of great technology that's been developed over the past 20 years. It's way more affordable than it used to be. So many utility companies have programs to help you transition your lighting to LED lighting. And I would say 15 years ago, LED lighting sucked. Like there was only one color and it was really harsh. And when you changed it in your library, you're like, why do I care about the planet? This is a horrible experience on an everyday basis. But now there's a range of choices and warmth levels, and you can really control the lighting much more than you could 15 years ago. So look for a utility program that will sponsor and underwrite the cost of transitioning to like LED lighting, which will reduce your electricity costs and be better for the planet. Energy audits themselves can help identify the best ways to reduce energy consumption in your building, lighting being only one attribute of that. You might discover that your windows, you're basically like, you're using air conditioning to cool the outdoors because your windows are horrible, or that your roof isn't well insulated. So it can help you see where the problems in the building may lie. I think the other idea here about avoiding service interruptions is to just be realistic. You can't do everything perfectly, right? So shutting off the copy machine every time someone uses it, and then you have to turn it back on and power it up before someone can use it again. That's not realistic. But shutting down all the computers at the end of the day so they're not running all night, that's realistic. So finding those things that make sense for your library, do those, and those that don't make sense, don't do those.
Thank you. That is actually something that I've learned through this program is really just tailoring it to your institution because everybody is just so different.
Yeah, we like to say with the certification program, there's no wrong answers.
Mm-hmm.
You do what works for your situation. It's scalable. We have libraries that, the library I mentioned that just got certified, they serve less than 500 people. And then we've got San Diego County Public Library in the program serving what, 3 million people? And it works for both of them. It works for academic libraries, regardless of size as well. And it really is customizable to what you're faced with and what you can control.
Thank you so much. And I see Melissa, who's on this little organizing committee, has just put in a plug for our next event too. It will be just a discussion panel amongst the libraries in San Diego. So if anybody is interested here, just to go in and register there too. Does anybody have any other questions for Rebekkah? Well, if there are no more questions, I just want to say thank you so much, Rebekkah, for taking the time to do this for us today. We are recording this and we will share it out amongst our county librarians and library workers to hopefully inspire them and maybe the public library and some of the other academic libraries will take a look at the Sustainable Libraries Initiative certification program. And, we can all kind of work together. I think that this is a great collaboration where we can share our resources and learn from each other.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Sarah. I always appreciate the chance to talk to you.
Thank you so much.